So welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to join us. And the topic all week long has been around innovation, transformation, and everything else. I don't think there's anybody more impacted around this topic and this rapid change that's going on than Kirsty. I don't think there's anybody more impacted than employees and our future workforce, but also our current workforce. And we're going to explore a lot of different topics around how companies are actually helping employees out, how we're helping shape the future employee. And before I get started and let our esteemed panelists introduce themselves, we learned a couple different things about each other this morning, not the least of which is we all have teenagers. How many of you all have teenagers living at home? Very interesting. So as we frame up this topic around the shifting workforce, I think it's interesting to hear, when we talk about to our teenagers, is how do you tell our teenagers, prepare for a job that may not exist, using technology that probably doesn't exist, and to solve a problem that we don't even know exists. That's what we're talking about, as we talk to our own teenagers, and you're probably doing the same thing. So as we introduce ourselves, Kirsty, we'll start with you, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your company and some of the cool things, because we're going to get into that, because it's very unique and it's very specific to some of the countries you're working with too.
Thank you very much. So firstly, thanks very much to YPO for putting on such a fantastic event. Thank you all for being here. And a big thank you to EY as well for inviting me to be part of this panel. Really, really appreciate being here. So TTRO Training Online, I founded the company in 2008 here in Cape Town. I have a bit of a strange accent. I am originally from New Zealand. I lived in London for about 6 years and have been living in South Africa for around about 12, 13 years now, but increasingly spending a lot of time in the Middle East. Fundamentally, the company is looking at how do we address, using enabling technologies, the ability to develop people and fundamentally develop people into jobs and into roles that we know don't yet exist, and looking at how we use enabling technologies, how do we use artificial intelligence, how do we use virtual reality, augmented reality, and various different technologies that do exist today, and reshaping the way we're developing human capital. We work primarily with large business, we work with government, we work across the spectrum of lifelong learning, so we're engaged in a lot of really sort of rethinking the way we're educating our children and how we're doing that, not only in terms of what we're teaching them, but the tools that we're delivering the learning through. And how do we make it a lot more relevant so that in 5 to 10 years' time, we're not producing unemployed youth, we're producing highly effective and really employable youth, both into our businesses, but also into being small, medium enterprises and entrepreneurs. So in a nutshell, that's what the business is about. And really looking forward to sharing some of the insights that we've got in emerging and developing markets. So particularly our journey in South Africa, but also some really interesting insights that we have in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and work we're doing in the United Kingdom.
And Kirsty, you guys have won a number of different awards, not the least of which is the Entrepreneur of the Year award winner, right? And as well as in London for one of the most inspiring companies from the London Stock Exchange.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate to be involved with that. So part of our journey with EY has been through the Endeavour Entrepreneurial Network. So TTR is an Endeavour company. We've had a lot of support, and we were nominated to be a company that inspires Africa, and we were awarded that, or on that list of companies to inspire Africa in 2019 last week. So I think that's an honor. It's also a challenge. It's something that means that we need to step up, and we really need to be inspirational in what we do and how we lead and what we develop. Part of the F&B Innovation Award in 2016 and part of the EY Entrepreneurship Program, or Entrepreneur of the Year Program the year before that. So it's been a journey.
Which is outstanding. We're going to get to the kids in a second. Ajahn, to my left, is a partner of mine. He runs our entire practice in the continent of Africa. He's told me as an American, there's very likelihood I'm going to say the country of Africa. And so I just needed to get that out there before he makes fun of me. But Ajahn, you've won a number of different awards, and you've been our CEO, I think, for the last 8 or 9 years. You've won a number of awards, I think 6 or 7 different countries as a top employer. here in Africa, including South Africa, which is very impressive. But I have to say something before you introduce yourself, something far more impressive than that, and we have a number of folks in here that have teenagers. Ajin might be the most impressive parent I've ever met for one fact, and we might have to give you a round of applause for this. His daughter, who is 18 years old, has given up her cell phone for 3 years.
Yeah.
So we want to figure out how that works in the future workplace.
Yeah, just to keep me grounded, Ryan, I have to say I also have a 14-year-old, so a boy, and he's not given up anything. It was interesting your framing up front about kids, how do we prepare them for jobs that don't exist? What I can say about a 14-year-old boy right now is he knows the answers to everything, the questions to nothing. So there's no doubt a lot of work ahead for us. But fantastic being here as a former YPO myself.
Yeah. Fantastic
to be up on stage and interacting with a number of colleagues that I still recognize from the past. You asked about some of the recognition that we've achieved, and it's an interesting. Our organization is pretty interesting. When we've operated in this part of the world for just on 160 years now. That's how long we've been on the African continent. And when you look at the makeup within the organization, people are often surprised to know that the average age of the folks that work in our firm is 28. So no one's been here for 160 years. So average age 28, and when you think about the pyramid structure of what we have, partners at the top and staff at the base, the largest cohort actually is in that 21 to 24 years old. So it's an extremely young organization, in as much as we have quite a long history. And I think for us to ensure that we remain relevant to our people, our clients, it's been a constant process of innovating and challenging how we actually serve our own people. The idea is, if your own people can't love the organization, there's no way you can get your clients to do that. And so, that journey really started with us questioning a number of things. When we look at many organizations around us, you see the workplace design, largely still set up on the traditional ideas that you saw in the 80s and 90s, which was, hierarchical, centered around how you drive more productivity or largely reward for tenure. So the more senior you get, closer you got to the window or an office or something like that. Whereas the young people we're employing today, if you listen to what they're looking for global experiences. They want to work in the digital environment. They want to be exposed to the most complex projects early on in their lives. The workplace itself is a lot more diverse in terms of the skills that we bring in. So we've had to make sure that, beyond the regular stuff like making sure you've got good benefits and a nice workplace design, that you're setting up the organization around people's experiences. And this whole idea of customer experience that, many people are talking about, how do you bring those concepts into your people's experiences? And that's been a big part of our journey and big part of the reasons for our recognition.
Congratulations. That's tough to do over and over and over again, and you guys have done it, which is why we wanted you to join us. You used the word workplace actually 3 or 4 times as you were walking through there. I'd like to, ask each of you, from your perspective, what is the workplace of the future? And you started to touch on it, Ajin.
Yeah. We see there's a big trend. Of course, many people are looking at their office designs in particular, and there's a lot of work being done on, if I can call it, the hard stuff, the infrastructure. So people are building, new offices that look, far more open plan, flexible workspaces designed around different types of work rather than the traditional structural hierarchical model. What we found personally is, it's absolutely important to make sure you've got workplace design that reflects people's work style. But in fact, it's far more important to get the soft stuff right. So how do people actually experience that world of work? So things like creating flexible work, I would say to you 10, 15 years ago, when you saw people sitting in a coffee shop with a laptop, you thought, well, there's a slacker struggling to get meaningful employment probably, and this is what they do, right? Today we see people sitting in coffee shop. That looks like meaningful work. And so how do you replicate that environment, that people, when they're working in flexible spaces and places, that they can do that? Because if they're in the spaces they enjoy, you get far more engagement, far more productivity out of these folks. The other thing is that given the amount of time that people spend in the workplace, and particularly our young people, what we find is they're looking to us to create that sense of community. So the workplace is not just a place where you come and get a piece of work done, a job done, but it's also community. So what do you do, at the physical level? Is there other activities beyond the work? Do you arrange sporting events for young kids who love to participate in these things? Do you appeal to the emotional side? Are there networks that are created where people can come together and give expression to hobbies or other interests that they might be interested in? So you've got to look at all aspects of their career ambition, the physical side, the emotional side, and that sense of community. And if you can create all of that in the workplace, enabled by some nice design, you're starting to create the environment where you'll get the innovation, you'll get the engagement, you'll get the productivity you're looking for.
Which is really what this generation of folks want. Kirsty, when you, at the training room online, you've got a cradle to grave concepts when we talk about workplace of the future. And as you're talking to countries as well as companies, how are people talking to you about what that workplace? And then second question to that was, what are you doing to actually help them, develop the skills for the workplace of the future?
So it's an interesting one. I mean, we've done quite a lot of discussions across that lifelong learning journey around what does a learning ecosystem look like. So I guess as you're discussing what does a workplace look like, we're looking at it from the positioning of what does a learning ecosystem look like? What does a pop-up learning environment look like? I think we've all seen and experienced enough failure in terms of learning environments where the solution is to put technology into the classroom. So the classroom fundamentally looks exactly the same. There's a teacher at the front, there's rows, there's desks, there's chairs, there's children sitting there, and we give them technology, but there's no interconnectedness between the technology, the teaching, the learning. It's just injected in. So we've been looking at designing learning ecosystems and learning spaces which integrate the human element, the physical element, and the digital element. And fundamentally saying classrooms of the future aren't, thankfully, going to look like classrooms of the past. And I think that that's true of the workplace and true of all of our environments. And, down to the physical way in which we like to read a book at our home. We don't necessarily read a book and learn while sitting at a desk and a chair. So why do we expect our children to sit at a desk and a chair and learn and read or engage with technology in the way that we're getting them to engage? So, we really see the whole ecosystem of learning and the workplace fundamentally changing and being a place in which we can learn anywhere and at any time. So much more informal style of learning as opposed to very formal structured classrooms and days of learning as opposed to nano learning or micro learning, which is definitely giving the agility for people to learn, unlearn, relearn, reskill, and remain relevant in society as the fourth industrial revolution undoubtedly is changing the pace at which things are changing.
I think, Ryan, I think that's so interesting. I read something interesting yesterday. If you look at almost every university around the world and the degrees they offer, what's interesting is irrespective of what course you might be studying, it might be engineering, accounting, arts, or anything, they're all typically are designed around a 3-year or a 4-year program, which gives you the degree, right? And so there's an interesting reflection on how come every degree, irrespective of its complexity or what's being taught, takes 3 years to learn. Is there some rule around 3 years? Well, the rule is simply that's designed around what suits the school. It's not around what suits the students who are actually there. So this idea about the classroom, the teacher, and that style of learning, we see that radically changing in the workplace. You use the word lifelong learning, and clearly as we bring in not just the younger generations, but I'm sure we're going to talk about this fourth industrial revolution, how we deliver training to folks who've been in the workplace, this idea that learning is an ongoing, on-demand type of process. And so what are the infrastructure, the tools, the environment you can create that people can learn on demand?
And Kirsty, I've heard you mention a couple times this week, and you just mentioned again this whole concept of nano learning. I don't know how many of you guys have thought through this, and Ajahn makes a good point. So if universities, as their current form, are not set up to do that, Kirsty, your company's actually trying to develop something that does get to this nano learning, and probably within maybe 5 years, 10 years, the degrees as we know them, I wouldn't say they may no longer exist, but they may become a lot less relevant. And maybe talk a little bit more about this nano learning.
Yeah, so nano learning or micro learning just refers to really bite-sized chunks of content that can be consumed typically digitally, but even in a physical environment. So it's a small amount of learning, but delivered over a longer period of time. And I think if we look at the way that we consume content generally, everybody on your mobile devices, you're reading the news there, you're watching YouTube videos, you're searching to find content that's relevant. The length of that content that we're choosing to consume is typically very short. So in 2008, when we were first designing e-learning solutions as a business, we were designing modules of learning that were 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and that was quite a normal length of a module of learning, and that consisted of a number of modules that made up a program. Now, if we're designing learning, we talk about designing digital assets, and an asset might be 30-second video, it might be a 1-minute animation, it might be an immersive virtual reality experience, which puts you in a simulated environment, and you're in that environment for 4 to 5 minutes. So the length of content design is getting much shorter, which really calls for a different level of instructional design and instructional thinking around how do we get a really concise message across in a short space of time with the same outcomes in terms of the impact that we're able to create with the output of what's expected from that learning. So the critical thinking in learning design is fundamentally changing, and I think that's really driven by that pace of change. So in terms of the university and the higher education space, I think huge disruption is going to happen within that, and I believe it needs to happen, as it does in the space of K-12 or the schooling public education system. We need to see dramatic change in order to be able to address not only what we're teaching, but how we're teaching. And I think that that's really talking to this sort of statistic which says that 65% of children in primary schools today are going to enter into jobs when they leave school that don't currently exist. So we can't continue to change curriculum every 4 to 5 years, and fundamentally, those of you who've got children in school, which is many, you'll notice in the curriculum your children are studying, it's really not that different to what we studied when we went through schooling. And the challenge with that is that you don't enter the workplace now and remain in the same job doing the same thing for an extended period of time until you retire. The world of work is demanding us to learn new skills all the time in order to adapt with what's changing around us. And I think that's what's driving the fundamental change in learning design and why nano learning is becoming so important. And I think, there's a lot of young people that are graduating from university having studied 3 to 4 year degrees, which they believe, and they think they've got an expectation of coming into a good job at the end of that, which fundamentally is not there for them, it's not available. So the skills and what they're learning in these degrees is actually not what's being called for in the workplace.
It is, and Adrian, when we were talking just within EY, we've got about 260,000 employees. This is a stunning statistic, no matter how many times I hear it or say it, is we hire about 70,000 people a year at EY. Probably 45,000 off campus, which is stunning. As we sit here and talk about the pace of change and how these degrees are changing, at EY we've done a couple different things to address what Kirsty says is nano learning. You might talk a little bit about the EY badges in terms of how we're upskilling people, like on a real-time basis.
Yeah, so it's interesting you play with those numbers and why this is relevant here. If we look at some of the big residential universities of the world, the ones that have earned themselves global ranking status, the Harvards and the Oxfords and the Stanfords of the world, I don't know if anyone in the room can guess how many full-time students that any of these universities typically have in a given year. Does anyone want to guess? If you took a Stanford or a Harvard, how many students would they have? Full-time residential students. Yeah, residential. 12? 3? 6 to 9. Yeah, so the number is closer to 20,000, right? Do you know how many online students they have? Sorry? 50. The number is close to 100,000. So it's interesting, you look at even the traditional residential universities, how that system's changing. Now, what that provoked for us, certainly at EY, is with a workforce distributed in just on 150 countries, 270,000 people, we never thought of ourselves in this way, but have quickly realized we're one of the biggest learning organizations actually in the world, bigger than some of these well-known universities. And the reality is, if we're going to serve our clients in the best way possible, we've always got to make sure that our people are equipped with the most current, most relevant knowledge, in a wide spectrum of areas, from industry to technology to traditional issues in tax or accounting. So how do you deliver that? You can't deliver learning to 270,000 people in the traditional classroom with a teacher behind desks and chairs.
We don't have enough classrooms anymore anyway
They
to do that.
they just don't exist. So this whole idea of creating almost best way I'd describe it to you is a program called Badges at EY, which is in simple terms, think about it as an online library of YouTube-style videos curated to find the best content on learning topics that are relevant to the work that people might be doing, that are available to every single employee, irrespective of where you are in the organization, irrespective of your rank. They're fully accessible to you. You can do it anytime you want, at the pace, at the level you want. And the way the content is curated, it has a grading system that allows you to complete modules and earn a badge, essentially, as an early stage, mature, advanced, and a qualified person. The idea is, as we deliver this learning program, the style of learning, as it were, we will make sure that those badges actually become industry recognizable. So we'll soon launch an online portal where companies in the market will be able to essentially look at that learning as verifiable learning. What we're finding, particularly with our young people, is the uptake has been incredible, because they're now able to access things like robotics, blockchain, artificial intelligence, and they're voluntarily going onto these sites to find the content, to learn. They're learning to code. They're getting, they're experimenting with basic levels of AI, etc. And they're actually doing far more than we could ever have done had we created a curriculum, put them in a classroom, and said, here's mandatory learning, right?
And we don't make people do this. This is the most stunning thing. We've created these, and we've had, I think, over 100,000 hours just in the last year and a half since we developed. There's no requirement that our staff go through this.
So what you're finding is that you're creating quite a virtuous ecosystem now, as you were describing, Kirsty, where as the talent pool starts to develop in itself by simply making the content available. I mean, the job we really have is to make sure that the content is there, but then how do you give expression to the ideas, the projects, the insights that these folks are now coming up with? Because once equipped with this knowledge, they obviously want to do something with it. And that is putting, an interesting challenge on us as an organization to think about how do we now start to create this innovation culture in the organization, so that innovation, which might historically have been top down, actually, in truth, is bottom up. And how do you create the ecosystem that enables it?
Yeah, and you can go in on LinkedIn, and on any individual person's badge will say, or on their LinkedIn profile or whatever, it'll literally say, here's the 5, 10 different badges I've earned, and it's certifiable that they'll be able to be out there. I didn't look at your LinkedIn page, but I don't have any on mine, so I'm going to go after that. So we started talking about artificial intelligence, and I think each of these respective organizations use AI very differently. And Kirsty, I'd love to hear you talk about what you're doing at the training room online with artificial intelligence and how you're able to, and what your goal is to be able to track, in EY's terminology, badges, but how you're going to be able to track skills for these employees, kids, through employees of the future.
Absolutely. So one of the things I think we've been fortunate in within the business is the opportunities that have come our way to work in early childhood projects, to work with the National Department of Basic Education within public schools. We've worked with colleges, we've worked with universities, and broadly across multiple different industries. And typically, if we look at education, it's been structured systemically in verticals and in pillars. And we've been building platforms and designing solutions for K-12 or for the schooling sector. But then what we've realized is that the person will drop off at the end of that system and fundamentally enter into a whole new system, and that record of learning and what has gone on through that doesn't track in a horizontal view of lifelong learning. So what we've started to work on, and it's largely been driven by a project we're involved with in Saudi Arabia, which is aligned to Vision 2030. So Saudi Arabia has a very, very strong and well-articulated vision for 2030, and a big part of that is the development of human capability. And within that, one of the strategic objectives is to have a national lifelong learning platform where all citizens of Saudi Arabia will be interconnected and have a single lifelong learning record. So the idea of having a learning record store that goes through your journey of life, and through the intelligence that we can build into that platform, it not will only be able to intelligently send content through that is appropriate for what your profile is. So we all learn in different ways. So from a digital perspective, if there's a learning asset, which is a video, and I'm going to learn better, so my learning profile would be better if I was consuming a video-based content as opposed to reading an ebook kind of file, I'll get the most relevant content for where I am in my learning journey, and it will adapt and take me on a learning pathway towards a career. So the more we start to look at using enabling technologies like that and integrating it into platforms, we're fundamentally sort of building up a skills profile, a learning profile, and a persona around individuals, as opposed to looking at everybody being in the same grade, the same subject, having the same material at the same time, being expected to learn at the same pace, which we know fundamentally doesn't work. So, we've really, and so that's part of the rethinking, the reimagining, what could education in the future and learning in the future look like. These technologies are playing a hugely powerful part in how we're applying that within the business to add benefit to citizens, to communities, to companies, and ultimately to countries. And it links also into, specifically from an AI point of view, the 9 pillars that make up the fourth industrial revolution. We've been involved in the development of a capability center. It's an innovation center for Industry 4.0. It's based in Caxt University in Riyadh. And we're busy building a second capability center in Dhahran, which is in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. We really are hoping that we're going to get the support of governments to build a capability center here in South Africa, because it fundamentally enables, from a capability perspective, exposure to all of the equipment and all of the pillars that make up the fourth industrial revolution, and allows small, medium enterprise to go and prototype with access to mentorship, with access to training programs around the fourth industrial revolution, and take those ideas and be able to create product across multiple different industries and sectors, which will then go into manufacturing sectors and manufacturing plants. So we're designing a lot of learning curriculum around the fourth industrial revolution, and using that to not only create jobs. So where jobs are being displaced, there are many new jobs that are being replaced, which require a different set of skills. So we're involved in the design of content around that, but also very, very critically, we believe small, medium enterprise and entrepreneurs are the future and a big part of the future of business. And we're using that as an enabling platform to support entrepreneurs and the growth within the fourth industrial revolution.
So being able to track, not only a student, but literally an employee through their life, whatever skills they may have, may actually help dictate what job they get, whether they know it or not, but it may also allow people to actually upskill for a particular job. Now, Adrian, at EY, we're actually using AI in a different way, and you talked about job displacement. talk about how we're using it at EY, because I want to really get into this topic. First, talk about how we're using, and then let's talk about how that changes the workforce.
Yeah, maybe just before I answer that, one of the things that Kirsty said, around curating personal experiences or individual experiences for people, because learning will happen in a very personal, individual way. I just want to underscore that point, and maybe for everyone in the room to appreciate that is a radical shift that actually is taking place right now, and especially as we bring in more and more young people into the organization, their experiences with technology and the way they consume things is extremely personal. So from small things like shopping that they might do online. In our days, when you wanted to buy music, you bought the whole CD. Today, they buy the song they want, not the CD, right? Or if they're buying shoes, they go online and they design what colors they want and what stripes they want and where they want it, and that's what they get. So when they come into the workplace, they expect that level of personalization. I think that is an interesting pressure that it puts on us to make sure, or it challenges us to make sure that we're actually, creating environments where we can provide on-demand learning, create those personal experiences, so that we're unlocking the self-directed learning, because we find that the self-directed learning goes at a much faster pace than a traditional curriculum-based thing that we might try and do in a traditional way. Now, your question around platform and using AI in our own organization, something we learned over the last 5 years is, again, a traditional idea of how you staff a job would be, client comes along, you've got the work assignment, you go to the folks who run the resources in the organization, and you ask for the skills that might be available at that point in time, and you take what's available, you build a team, you generally have good teams, and off you go. Through an internal platform called Discover, our folks are now going online and capturing their skills, badges, their work experiences, and what we're starting to do now is create a system of an internal market, if you want to think of it that way, where we'll start to post the projects that we have, and internally that can be matched up through AI with the skills in the organization. So you're matching up the best skill, not just learned stuff, but experienced people as well, to the work opportunities. All of a sudden, you truly are matching the best people for the job, not the most available people for the job. That starts to change the dynamic about how people see work, what they're there to do, and how you start to build teams. So, I mean, that's just a small example of how technology is driving far better use of the resource.
In our industry, it's no different than a lot of other industries. If I talk about hiring 60, 70,000 students a year, people a year, and then people leaving, there's a lot of stuff that we do that people don't want to do.
Oh, yeah.
And so last year alone, we took out about 2.1 million hours, which is about 1,000 employees of work, yet we still increased the amount of employees that we fired.
Yeah.
And I expect that to go to probably well north of 6 million hours over the course of this year. But we keep hiring employees. We're hiring very different skill sets. And you can talk about, maybe in Africa, some of the different employees that we're hiring today that we probably didn't even interview on campus, 2 and 3 years ago.
Yeah. I think this is an interesting topic, and I'm sure for as many people in the audience here today, you're going to have a view on this. Will this automation, robotics, fourth industrial revolution, is this going to displace jobs? And certainly, when you look at what's going on around you in the short term, you can't refute that idea. We're seeing certainly at the entry level, routine, repetitive tasks are being automated at an advanced pace right now, and they're being done by robotics or shared service centers, whatever. So in the short term, no doubt you're seeing some level of loss of jobs. But what we've seen in our own organization as we've moved people higher up the value chain, as we've equipped them with more skills, we've been able to incubate and create new offerings, new services, and use the skill that we have actually away from routine, repetitive tasks. that on a net basis, our business has actually grown and we've been able to hire in more people. So today, there might be a lot of stereotyping about what EY is and what we do, given people knowledge of what we do, but you might be surprised to know that just about a third of the people who work for us actually have a traditional finance degree background. More than 2/3 today actually come from all sorts of other backgrounds, typically the STEM qualifications in maths, engineering, computer science. So the workforce dynamic has changed, totally, which allows us to actually create new things and offer new things to the market.
And I want to offer this up. We've got an intimate crowd here, so we can ask some questions. But before I do, I'd like to actually talk about something that, may be a bit controversial here in terms of, Kirsty, as you're working through students and their data, what skills, if you've got data on my child, for instance, who's going through school, you know everything about them. Who actually owns this data, this set?
Yeah, look, it's I think something where, from our perspective, working at a national level, the data from public schools, which is really where our primary interest is. In South Africa, we have 12 million children that are in a public schooling system. They have a national learning record or a sort of central place where that is managed. So from our perspective, we're interested in having the data that comes into the system that we're responsible for managing for and on behalf of the department, to be able to better inform what should be happening with the overall learning outcomes and how closely should we be aligning curriculum into where the future jobs and skills are going to be needed. We won't own that data. The department will still own that data. Where we're building a lifelong learning platform in Saudi Arabia, the government will own the data. But what we have to be able to do is use that data to inform and analyze and critically make decisions around better learning outcomes, better availability of data. Dom and I actually had a chat about this, Dom, here with the YPO help jacket on. Dom's our
who's your
partner,
MD and is obviously a member of
partner
YPO.
and he's partner in the business and our global managing director. But we were having a chat about it in the concept of the blockchain and the principles of the fact that ultimately your skills are going to sit on the blockchain, so the trusted network and environment where that is, by nature of what that brings, it's your data. So I think the confidentiality of how it's used, it's a discussion that's a really interesting one being had at government. And I don't think that the answers are there. It'll be a debate that will continue, I'm sure, for a long time. But yeah, sort of our view on it is that it's owned by the government, it's owned by the individual, and those that the individual chooses to give that access to, which may be their educators, it may be other people in their family, it may be their medical practitioners. As we increasingly start to use medical data and interconnect that with learning data, the power of what we can understand around how somebody learns and what they learn and what they can truly do to be the best that they can be is where the data becomes really, really relevant.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic because, frankly, around the world there's a big debate around who owns the data, right? And other than Google, who sort of monopolizes that space already, this whole idea of if you're going to deliver personal experiences, if you're going to be able to shop in the way you want or consume in the way you want, your data is in the public platform anyway, somewhere, right? What I think we're going to have to find is better systems of partnerships, alliances, ecosystems in the way we operate our businesses because, given the strong focus on things like data privacy, we're not going to find that data sits in one or two large corporations of the world, and where it sits there today, you can see the criticism they're getting, and that's going to be broken up at some stage. If you just think about how most of us execute on our businesses today, I'd say, again, in the past, we felt we needed to own everything that we were using in the delivery of services to our clients. But today, we probably own about half of it, and we partner with other organizations in the market to deliver those solutions. So we might be partnering with a technology company, a software company, or somebody who's got an IP and a methodology, or we might have contingent workers who come in for a period of time. So this whole idea of working in alliances and ecosystems becomes part of the DNA of how you deliver. And I think the same thing ultimately is going to happen in the space of data. Governments are going to no doubt play a bigger role in this, as you're seeing this develop around the world. And this idea of where the boundaries are and how the sharing takes place, so we can enable more services to the citizens, to business, to the communities, is really where that future is going to lie.
Absolutely. Any questions? I've got lots of different questions, but I'd love to take questions from the audience if anybody's got a question. Yes. I can repeat the question if you always can't hear, so go ahead and ask it.
And if you're saying that you have the potential to use AI in future to match employees with projects, how do you determine that an individual has actually achieved what you're meant to learn before you can say that you can do it and that you're good at it?
Yeah, and that's a really great question. I'll tell you why. About 4 years ago, in fact, our firm in the UK led with this, and so I won't claim that we were the original innovators here in South Africa, but have followed suit, which was, in our previous recruiting profile, we would have said to you, you needed a minimum of a university undergrad degree to join our organization. That was, for decades, the prevailing practice. And soon we start to figure out that, in fact, that whilst the university degree is a reasonable indicator of what you'll get on the other side when people join you, it is not an absolute indicator, and there are many people without that degree who would even perform a lot better. So we've actually removed that as a requirement in the job postings that we actually put out for people. And so this has challenged us now to look at two factors. In the past, where we might have looked at performance only, the challenge of trying to assess potential. How do you make sure that we can understand potential? How do we assess in the interview process for what I described to you as attitude as opposed to aptitude? And that attitude test has become a bigger part of the interview process as we let people in. Because the viewers, we've got the equipment, the infrastructure to provide the technical learning that you're going to need for the job, provided you come with the right learning attitude, teaming attitude, etc., into the organization. So that was one of the big shifts that we did across the organization, this whole idea of looking at potential, not just performance, and breaking this traditional mindset that the university degree is the be-all and end-all. On the badges, every one of the badges are graded. So you could sit through a badge, and Kirsty describes in a 20-minute video on blockchain. Well, the level of certification that you're going to attract for that is just that. You're not going to be able to describe yourself as a blockchain expert, right? So that same blockchain program would then have about 6, 7, 8 modules, which allows you to go through it, and at different stages of those modules, at some point, you're going to have to apply that skill that you've learned.
Actually work on a blockchain
and work on a blockchain project and deliver something before you get to the word you used was mastery. So we actually have a grading system, that allows us to differentiate who sat through lots of YouTube videos and who's actually applied it, and what level at which they've applied it, so we can assess the true performance.
So as we wrap up, you mentioned YouTube videos, and I think it sounded like about 80% of this audience has teenagers. So, a couple things. One, my kids, they're not going to be masters at anything just by watching YouTube videos. I can tell them that when I talk to them this evening, right?
Okay.
So final question here. We talked about, jobs that may not exist, technology that may not exist to solve a problem that may not exist. what would you tell an entering freshman in university, so first year university, or your own child, what to do, what to study?
Well,
There's everybody here needs this answer.
yeah, and it's a really difficult answer. My son is 12, turning 13 this year, and very involved in what I've been doing. So he was 1.5 years old when I started this business, so he's very acutely aware of my view of how dysfunctional and broken the current education system is. And he does tend to leverage that to the best advantage that he can whenever it comes to doing homework and what is required of him to do whilst the dysfunctional system continues. I'm certainly of the mindset that we need to do things in life that we feel really passionate about, and we need to find what that is, and we need to nurture that into something that becomes a career or becomes something that we do and wake up every day wanting to do. I'm certainly encouraging him to think about being an entrepreneur. I believe that it allows you to create a destiny and give you choices in life. And at this stage, his thought process is around gaming. So he wants to either be paid to be a gamer, or he wants to create the games, or a combination thereof. So if that's his passion, I'm going to support it 100% and let him follow it.
Good to know whatever continent we're on, that dream and that job will exist. Adrian, what are you telling
I was
him?
going to say, I hope there are lots of jobs in that space because I've got 2 kids, a 17-year-old daughter, a 14-year-old boy. Does anyone in the audience, do you know what the fastest growing sport in the world is?
Gaming.
Esports, right? Esports. Does anyone know this year's esport program, Fortnite, have put up prize money? Does anyone know how much they've put up for the prize money?
10 mil.
10 million? You can go higher? You can go higher?
50.
You can go higher?
Jeez. 100.
$100 million is the prize money for esports. So this year, and Fortnite in particular. So when I ask my son this exact question, he's convinced me that's a legitimate career. I'm not so sure about that just yet.
It's hard to debate that.
We're glad we have 2 kids, so my daughter is very different. And she's just, in fact, interesting about how each of them learn differently, despite what we might think we've treated them exactly the same. She just finished high school last year, and she's off to India right now, where she's gone to study a philosophy course, 3 years full time. And I think, the answer to the question you asked, Ryan, and I agree with Kirsty, is make sure they're following their passion. If they're following their passion, their area of interest, they'll always be engaged. They'll always find something to do. And I think the worst thing we could do is try and move them down a path of what we think is right, versus where they're showing the passion.
This is great advice, and thank you guys for joining us, and honestly, thank both of you guys for getting over here. This is fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you.